Perfect. We will go ahead and get started here then. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the role of ammonia and hydrogen in the evolving energy landscape. My name is Rachel Stuckey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Conservative Energy Forum. MNCEF is a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 2016 to ensure conservatives had a seat at the table in the clean energy conversation. We approach energy from a market-based, all of the above perspective, valuing innovation, national security, economic growth, and affordability. And we're proud to be a part of the Conservative Energy Network, which is a coalition nationwide, active in 27 states now, advancing conservative clean energy solutions across the country. And in the global energy transition, we often focus on the sources themselves, like wind turbines, solar panels, hydroelectric dams, and advanced nuclear, among many others, or on the supporting industries like mining, skilled labor, or ag producers hosting projects. But what's often overlooked, and what we're here to highlight today, is the critical role that ammonia and hydrogen can play across sectors, from decarbonizing the power grid and modern agriculture to transforming some of the hardest to abate areas of the economy, like heavy industry and manufacturing. Long used in industrial and farming applications, these molecules are now gaining momentum as clean energy carriers and tools for reducing fossil fuel dependence in energy intensive systems, from fertilizer production to shipping and steelmaking. And as momentum builds around hydrogen and ammonia, the policy environment is shifting just as quickly, with new federal developments this week signaling both opportunities and challenges for market certainty and long-term investment. That's part of why this conversation is so timely. And today we'll cover the basics: what makes hydrogen and ammonia green, I believe among some other colors that we'll discuss, and how they're being used and what it will take to scale these solutions here in Minnesota and beyond. And just a couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared with attendees afterward. And if you have questions during the webinar, please submit them using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will leave time towards the end for audience questions. So I'll now briefly introduce each of our panelists, then we'll watch a brief presentation from each of them before the discussion and Q&A. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's panelists, who bring a range of expertise from industry, policy, and research. First, we have Dr. Luca Zullo, Senior Director of Science and Technology at the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, or AURI. A chemical engineer with a global career, he's worked at Shell Research in the Netherlands and with Minneapolis-based companies like Cray Research, Silicon Graphics, and Cargill, where he led biofuels and carbon reduction projects. He now helps early-stage companies scale clean technologies. Dr. Zullo holds degrees in chemical engineering from the University of Padua and a PhD from Imperial College London. And next up, we have Rob Davis, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Clean Counts, which many of you in the audience may know formerly as MRETS, or the Midwest Renewable Energy Tracking System. Clean Counts is a nonprofit that manages a platform for tracking and verifying environmental attributes tied to energy, such as renewable electricity and low carbon fuels. The organization supports both regulatory and voluntary markets across North America by issuing and managing environmental attribute certificates. Rob brings deep insight into how market mechanisms and registries can support emissions reductions across sectors. And then next we have Tristan Peitz, Head of Business Development at Talus Ag, a company focused on sustainable fertilizer production. Talus Ag develops modular systems that produce green ammonia using renewable energy with the goal of making zero carbon fertilizer available on site. Their work tackles emissions, supply chain vulnerabilities, and cost challenges in ag, both in the US and abroad. And finally, we have Mike Reese, Director of Operations and a renewable energy researcher at the University of Minnesota's West Central Research and Outreach Center in Morris. He oversees the 1,100-acre research farm and leads work on producing anhydrous ammonia using wind and solar. His research focuses on reducing fossil fuel use in agriculture through the adoption of renewable and efficient technologies, and he's been in his current role since 2022. And if there's anything that I missed in the bios, feel free to add it on when you start your presentation. So with that, we'll jump right in and have Dr. Zullo get us started on framing the conversation around hydrogen and ammonia.
Thank you, Rachel. I think you're going to see, hopefully you can see my screen. Talking about ammonia, why ammonia is important. In the words of, Vaclav Smil, which is a professor of energy studies at the University of Manitoba, in Winnipeg, basically ammonia is one of the four material pillars of modern world. The other being cement, plastic, steel, and ammonia, and steel, in addition of ammonia. And also, ultimately, this always causes some interesting reaction because obviously we all see cement, plastic, and steel every day. We can probably never not avoiding see them, but but we don't necessarily see ammonia. However, if this morning any of you had breakfast, probably you have eaten something that owes the existence to ammonia, because ammonia is also semi super commodity. It's a very large product. So it's third largest chemical produced, second only to sulfuric acid and ethylene. Ethylene going to plastic, and sulfuric acid also goes into fertilizer. But ammonia is really the linchpin of every single fertilizer that is being used today. So this is a schematic of all the fertilizer supply chain, and everything is tied in from ammonia. And as you can see from this diagram, um, hydrogen is the primary feedstock to make ammonia, where with hydrogen and nitrogen from the air, which is very abundant, we are synthesized to make ammonia. And this is relatively, I mean, not recent, but modern invention. Before the Haber-Bosch process that was invented in the early 20th century, the ammonia fertilizer was all coming from natural sources, recycled manure, guano, which is basically fossilized manure, and obviously by using crops like legumes that fixate nitrogen from the air. But this invention is the most fundamental, probably one of the most fundamental invention of the 20th century, because it's really made possible the world as we see today. And for a simple reason, because without fertilizer, we have no food. And it's this interesting graphics here that shows the global population growth and the dependence on synthetic fertilizers. And as you see, this diagram shows the global population growth and the estimate of what the population growth would be without synthetic fertilizer. We can, I mean, with a certain level of confidence, say that probably 50% of humanity does exist today because of synthetic nitrogen and synthetic fertilizer in general. And if this is not convincing enough, well, you can compare that previous curve with the US corn and wheat productivity from the early century to today, where we have basically we have multiple folds increasing in productivity, while at the same time, and so we could have served more a growing population actually using less land. And to me, it's also interesting overimposing this diagram on the history of ammonia. As you see, the Haber-Bosch process was invented in the earlier 20th century. We first industrial production really started in the 20s, and really however, the really I wouldn't say that the expansion of the use of production of ammonia really after World War II. And no little part because the flip side of the production of ammonia is that also precursor to making explosive. But that industrial base ultimately led to the widespread adoption after World War II, and that really enabled the green revolutions and the continued growth in agricultural productivity, which we continue seeing today. So ultimately, whether is incontrovertible that without synthetic fertilizer, which depends on ammonia and in turn depend on hydrogen, we wouldn't have the agricultural productivity we have today. And those data shows very clearly. without synthetic fertilizer, the corn and wheat productivity, they would be stuck at basically 1940 level and probably hardly moved ever further. Also because some of the improvement in genetics were contingent to the availability of synthetic fertilizer and more abundant nitrogen sources. Obviously, people also remind all the time that synthetic fertilizer have impacts, and it's true, there are impacts in the abundant use of fertilizer. Not going to enter in a lot of detail here, they're here, but only to mention that a lot of these impacts actually are associated with nutrient management in general. So there really some phenomena like eutrophication and so on, or of pollution by nitrates in the groundwater are associated with nitrogen presence, and we could have those with manure, if that matter, if improperly applied. So it's really not associated with synthetic fertilizer per se, but only with inappropriate agronomic practices. And the system is dramatically improving as continuously in using evolving agronomic practice. So only the greenhouse gas emission associated with the manure production are unique to synthetic fertilizer. And why we have this? And we have this greenhouse gas emission because we require hydrogen, if you remember the initial, to make ammonia, and today hydrogen is all made from natural gas. It's worthwhile also looking at some of the economics. Today, the US has a small but significant deficit in ammonia. So we have some level of ammonia imports, about between 6 to 10% of the overall demand. So not a majority, but still significant enough not to be completely isolated from worldwide shocks. And this is an example. Those are charts from the Department of Energy, shows the impact of the events of the early 2022 and late 21 on the price of ammonia. As you see, the price of natural gas in the US remained pretty constant, but went way up in Western Europe, and that causes the global prices of ammonia, including the US prices, to go up. And that was a major shock for our agricultural system. Incidentally, this was not, Russia is a major producer of ammonia, but is still exported. This was really caused, the shock was caused by natural gas prices and European production basically being shut down for a long period. What the opportunity exists now, we started looking at is the fact that when you look at the US, there is a considerable spread between where most of ammonia today is produced, which is in the chemical alley of the Gulf region, and southern states, and you see the evolving prices. So today we're talking about FOB price in the Gulf in the order of $500 to $540 per ton, and the average weekly retail prices reported by DTN in Illinois, which is a good benchmark of Midwestern price. As you see, over a course of 5 years, the average retail price is $800 a ton. So there is a $300 a ton differential, which is associated with distribution and logistics, which are reasonably complex for ammonia because of the nature of that is a liquid that has to be transported under moderate pressure, and of course is also some hazard, which requires a specialized container and transportation. This spread opens up some interesting opportunity. As I mentioned, green ammonia requires hydrogen, and green ammonia requires green hydrogen. We can still use the Haber-Bosch process. When you look at the hydrogen in the United States, more than 20% of US hydrogen on a production of about 10 million metric tons goes into ammonia. The rest goes, the majority of the usage actually is a petroleum refining, but a significant amount goes into ammonia production. And this hydrogen production is the reason why ammonia production itself is responsible for about 2% of the worldwide greenhouse gas emission. But we could make hydrogen differently. For instance, we can make hydrogen by electrolysis. And what is interesting is this chart that shows, these two charts shows on one side the wind resources in the United States, in the state of Minnesota, as an example, and the Minnesota nitrogen fertilizer consumption by county. And as you see, there is actually a decent match between availability of wind and wind resources and demand of ammonia, which leads to basically to the opportunity to look at differently at ammonia and looking at local distributed ammonia production. A world-class plant of ammonia today are hundreds of thousands of tons per year or millions. Some of the larger plants in the US are actually in the order of 3 million tons per year. Instead, we are looking at can we build, and we can technically, smaller ammonia plants tied up to local distributed, sorry for the electrolyzer, the E remained, went away, electrolyzer, a local electrolyzer capacity, which in turn is tied up to a local wind production capacity, and creating enough to provide locally arbitraging also on that big spread that we have seen associated with distribution and logistics, while at the same time maintaining a lot of value in the local community. And so again, I think there is a great opportunity for small scale distributed ammonia production, and some of the benefit we see. Later, Mike Rees will talk about more in detail about these economics. So this I'll pass. He's gonna probably enter in many more quantitative details about this. But ultimately, with this presentation, I just want to give a very short but broad overview of what the opportunity, why ammonia is important, more than important, is indispensable, and what direction we should look at to making sure that we can continue rely on ammonia while mitigating some of the economics and environmental impact that it might have. And with this, I leave to the next presenter.
And I'm muted. Thank you, Dr. Azzullo. That's really helpful context and a really great foundation for the discussion. We will go to Mike next.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be visiting with you about the scale, renewable ammonia production compared to conventional ammonia production. As soon as I can advance my slides. There we go. So I'm at the University of Minnesota West Central Research and Outreach Center. We're located in West Central Minnesota. Been around since 1911. We have several programs. One area is renewable energy. Minnesota is a global leader in green ammonia research. We had the first wind-to ammonia pilot plant in the world back in 2013 and have looked at other projects such as using ammonia in grain drying as well as as tractor fuel. Our next project, which is scheduled to start construction very soon, is the next generation ammonia production system using wind and solar power and utilizing some advanced ammonia reactor designs as well as control systems. So conventional ammonia plants today are at world scale. Can use natural gas as the core energy source or hydrogen source in the United States. In China, they use coal, but here in the US, we have established our ammonia production basically essentially located around natural gas sources. And that's why we see quite a bit of it in the Gulf Coast, in Louisiana, and in Oklahoma and Texas, and not so much in the Corn Belt. I see in this diagram, I'd like to point out that Minnesota isn't included in the Corn Belt, but I think those of us from Minnesota would say we are definitely within the Corn Belt. So the nitrogen production, again, is at world scale. Anhydrous ammonia is the core. We use steam methane reforming to break down natural gas into hydrogen. And then we use anhydrous ammonia is then processed further into other nitrogen sources, as Lucas said. Wanted to point out that urea, we mix it with CO2 or blend it with CO2 to form ammonia with CO2 to form urea. And that's going to be important further down in my presentation. But you look at nitrogen fertilizer use by state in the Corn Belt, We see Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota, all of these states have extremely high consumption of nitrogen fertilizer. And interestingly, there's very little ammonia production in these states. And that gets back to what Luca was saying, that there's essentially a $300 difference between storage, transportation, as well as the margins that are charged in each of those steps to get it up to the Midwest. You look at green ammonia, which is renewable ammonia made from renewable sources like such as solar or wind. You look at the wind resource that we have, which is depicted in the left graph. The dark purple and lighter lavender colors are the high wind resource areas. And then you look at the corn belt, which is identified on this graph on the right with the dark green counties. And you see a nice synergy where we can use renewable ammonia to produce or renewable energy to produce renewable ammonia. We could meet the entire U.S. demand for nitrogen fertilizer with about 50,000 megawatts of nameplate wind energy. Right now, we have about over 100,000 megawatts of wind energy, so we could essentially add another 30%. And this is an opportunity to utilize wind and solar resources and excess nuclear power where it's stranded, where there isn't the load. So we're actually essentially creating a load with this intensive energy industry. So if you look at the ammonia and urea prices throughout the last 20 some years, you can, 10 years in this case, I guess, you can see that they are very volatile. So that's kind of inherent with using natural gas. Ammonia is traded nationally and globally. The volatility in natural gas or methane prices, you have volatility in food prices, there's conflict. And then in addition to that, 75% or over 75% of the ammonia in the US is produced by 4 companies. So that adds also to the volatility. When you look at the renewable nitrogen fertilizer market in comparison, you would produce it closer to demand. The renewable energy such as solar and wind are typically considered as stable costs. Utilities sign 20 to 30-year contracts for that power. Then along with that, we would have the local economic development. So this system would include electrolysis. So you're electrolyzing water to produce hydrogen. You're pulling nitrogen from the air through air separation and then combining it together through ammonia synthesis. And these technologies that are different at a smaller scale than what they would be at the world scale plants. And so these technologies must be deployed in an optimal way. These technologies are, however, ready for market. And as new technologies become available, they are entering the commercial system as well. So if you look at the renewable ammonia production costs in Minnesota, you see in the red line is the conventional. You see the green bar, dark green bar is the present day, what my colleagues, Matt Pallas and Peroma Steatidis projected for renewable ammonia. And then you can see in 2030 with the addition of economies of numbers, not economies of scale, and economies of numbers where you're mass manufacturing electrolyzers and ammonia reactors, you can drive down those prices. And so you can see currently we can be competitive with renewable ammonia versus conventional ammonia, but likely in the 2030 timeframe is when it becomes actually at cost parity or even lower in some cases. So just to take a case example of ammonia in Minnesota, we utilize about 600,000 metric tons per year, both in ammonia as well as urea. We have good wind resources across the state, especially in the Southwest. There's some factors that are enabling this. We have some permitting reform in the state. We've also established electrolyzer manufacturing in Findlay to supply these electrolyzers, which is kind of a critical supply chain element, is to having the supply of these larger electrolyzers. So if you look at renewable ammonia production in Minnesota from a standpoint of where to do it, the wind resource makes a huge difference. So my colleagues, again, Matt Pallas and Peroma Steatidis, did a study on this, looking at scales producing scales of 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 metric tons in central west, southwest, central east, and southeast Minnesota. And here's a view of the results. And location does matter, by the way. So if you take a look at or central east versus southwest, you see almost $110 difference between the per ton between those two places. And so that's one of the kind of the outcomes. The other outcome is if you look in general at the top of the screen, you see 666, 668, 558, 583. That's the basically the break-even price of the ammonia production at that scale and at those locations. So it's close to being where we need it to be competitive, not quite there yet. So if you look at a larger scale, in this case, it's 50,000 tons versus 100,000 tons. You can see at the lowest in Southwest that we're down to about $500 a ton. So we're driving that price down. So the overall point is that scale still matters. For that 100,000 metric tons, you would need about 275 megawatts of new wind capacity to do that. I think an interesting part that we could further explore, and Luca mentioned this briefly, is combining renewable ammonia production with the CO2 that's produced at our ethanol plants. The state map on the right shows where the ethanol plants are located and their size. And so the idea would be that we would take wind energy from some of these high wind producing areas. We would, at the site, produce hydrogen, convert it to ammonia, and then truck it or pipe it into these ethanol plants, combine it with the CO2 to produce urea. And just to give you an idea of what the costs are, we have a graph here showing the same locations and at three different scales, 87.5 or 87,500 metric tons per year, 175,000 metric tons per year, 350,000 metric tons per year. And if you look across the top of the screen, you can see that we can get down to about $324 per metric ton in the case of the medium-sized plants. Case of the large plant, we're looking at $282 a metric ton for urea. So that seems to be a very attractive economic model for moving forward, even under the current scenarios of tax credits. One, let's move on to this. I think green urea is kind of a nice also in fact that you're taking it out of the conventional nitrogen fertilizer supply chains. For example, ammonia requires large-scale refrigerated storage, whereas urea you can store in fairly easy and it applies fast and convenient for farmers. Our cooperatives are set up to store essentially their complete complete consumption for the year, so they have these large urea facilities that they can bring urea into and store for the year. So with that, hopefully I gave you a picture of the difference between small scale versus large scale conventional production. I think the overall message is that we can do this at small scale. Scale still matters. It's better to be on the larger side of that, similar to what we've seen in the ethanol plant industry or ethanol industry, whereas a 100,000 gallon plant per year is more competitive than a smaller plant. So I guess that's the overall message, and I'll pass it on to Tristan to talk a little bit more about turning this into a commercial reality.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Let me get the slides up here. Give me a second.
And while you're doing that, Tristan, I'm just going to remind audience members to use the Q&A box down on the bottom if you have questions for the panelists.
Okay, bear with me a second. All right. Sure. Okay, can everybody see this? All right, thank you. Building on what Luca and Michael had to say. My name's Tristan Peitz. I lead the business development efforts for Thales. We're a green ammonia, a small scale green ammonia company. We really think of ourselves as an energy technology and infrastructure company focused on producing green ammonia. I'll go over this quickly because Luca and Michael gave great overview, but ammonia is responsible for feeding a majority of the world's population. Without it, there'd be serious, food supply issues. It's a complex global supply chain, and as they both said, it's typically produced in large centralized plants. And because it's a gas, it needs to be, stored as a liquid, whether that be under low temperature or high pressure. We produce ammonia, and this is actually a slide from our sort of international, customer focused, making the transition from urea to ammonia, because in the developing world, the genesis of Talus was really around producing fertilizer locally in places where there is no supply chain or where the supply chain is incredibly expensive for urea. And so, some of the things that we think about are, ammonia is more efficient than urea. It's in and foremost, it's cheaper. Of course, there are issues with the logistics, but that said, if you can produce it locally, you can alleviate those heavy logistics and expensive logistics burden. So, a little bit about Talus. What our team has developed are small scale, modular, rapidly deployable systems. It was initially conceived in 2008. We had a pilot plant in Iowa from 2012 to 2022, but it was designed to be fully off grid. And ramp up and down with the availability of power. And in the US, it's more so the price of power. Um, we've deployed or are currently deploying four systems. Two are operational, one in Kenya, which was our first one, the second in Boone, Iowa, the third in Burgos, Spain. Kenya and Boone, Iowa are to serve farmers. Burgos, Spain is with Maxim. They make ammonium nitrate blasting materials that they serve global mining companies. It's after nitrogen fertilizer, the second largest use of ammonia is to make nitric acid and then make ammonium nitrate. And then Eagle Grove is our first larger scale system. So we've got two system sizes, and what we call a Talus 1 for 1 megawatt of electrolysis capacity, and a Talus 10, which is 10 megawatts of electrolysis capacity. You can see a rendering of the Talus 10, but the system's effectively five subsystems. We pull nitrogen out of the air. It's a standard PSA compressor. We make hydrogen from water. This is what makes it green. And that's an alkaline electrolyzer. In the case of the Talus 10, it's two 5 megawatt alkaline electrolyzers. Water purification, because what goes into the hydrogen generator needs to be very pure. And then it's a standard Haber-Bosch ammonia synthesis loop. Kind of the difference between us and large plants is that that synthesis loop is rampable along with the rest of the system, and then a control system. So we took an approach of utilizing as much off-the-shelf standard procured components as possible. And really sort of the secret sauce or some intellectual property is mostly in the controls and some compressor designs. But the key is that the system's interruptible. Typically, these large chemical plants need, they need a lot of time to shut down and start up, and they never ramp up or down based on power prices. They may, ramp production of ammonia down and sell off their gas contracts when spreads blow out, but that's a little bit different. Just a couple photos here. The one on the left is our system in Boone, Iowa, where the off-taker is Landis Cooperative. And then on the right side is our system in Naivasha, Kenya, where the off-taker is Kenya Nut Company. The interesting thing about the system in Boone is that we're currently integrating it with Landis's grain facility and the solar that Landis built. And so when they have highly variable power usage because they do grain drying and they load the trains. And so when they start drying grain or loading a train, our system gets a signal and it ramps down. The power is routed from the solar to their facility, and they expect to save as much money on power costs at this site as they expect to make selling the ammonia. The system, these are photos. This is an old photo on the left of one of the electrolyzers being loaded into the module at Eagle Grove. And then on the right side here is the system in Spain. You'll see it's a little bit different. There's an adiabatic cooling system, which uses a lot less water and more energy. This is a really, these Talos 1s are demonstration scale units as part of programs to deploy many more of the larger Talos 10s on long-term offtake agreements. And so that's a demo unit as part of a program to deploy systems to Maxim and BHP in Chile at the mine sites. The key sort of the key sort of value proposition to that makes this possible in the U.S. is the rampability. And so the grid in the U.S. is designed for the peaks. And so what we do is we operate in the valleys. And so we avoid those peak times, which it enables us to produce low cost ammonia. Fundamentally, ammonia is a commodity. There currently is no green premium. It's possible that one develops. Certainly, the large plants on the coast in the Gulf and elsewhere in the world expect to sell, high-priced ammonia into Europe and South Korea and Japan. But that's not our sandbox. So, when we think about sort of operating the system, it's really producing hydrogen and ammonia at the times when power costs the lowest. And some cooperatives and electric utilities have interruptible rates, time of use rates, load management programs, demand programs, and so this is definitely this is a key point of how we are able to price ammonia at what we see as a discount to the long-term average. And I'll get into the contracting structure in a minute here. But building on what Michael had to say is you think about the great power generation resource in the Corn Belt. It really is wind. I mean, it's the highest capacity factors in the country. And so there's really good intersection of local ammonia demand and high capacity renewable power, which also happens to be the cheapest form of electricity. And so our system is able to ramp down, which is important to miss those peaks. And then, it can do that pretty quickly and then ramp up a little bit slower, but still sufficient to work with the rates that some of these utilities do offer. Um, I want to talk about the tax credit just briefly, and we'll come back to this as a kind of lead into Rob. But effectively, 45V is what created an opportunity for Talos to build a business in the United States. Prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, if you would ask our CEO, Hiro Iwanaga, who's a co-founder and funded the early research in 2008 at Stanford, that to develop a modular small-scale green ammonia system that works on renewable power. It was conceived for this rural, remote, developing world application. And with the tax credit 45V, which is a production tax credit, we can sell ammonia in the United States and be competitive. Now, we did get clarity last week. The big beautiful bill was signed into law, which provides effectively 5 years for companies, from start of 2023 to January 1, 2028 to start construction. And so we worked very closely with Senate Majority Leader's office when the first draft was released to ensure that we had the runway to get these projects, start of construction. Um, the ammonia market is an interesting one. It's opaquely priced. There's no futures, there's no forwards. Farmers can sell forward their corn and buy ammonia kind of, for next season, but that's really about it. It's a variable and highly volatile commodity driven by global energy spreads. And in the US, as Michael said, it is an oligopoly. So you've got four producers that produce 80% of the supply. They also own about 90% of large scale storage. And so it's a real challenge for farmers to plan their business because they have no idea, what their one of their key inputs is going to cost them, 6 to 12 months from now. And so how we think about off-taking is or selling the product is we require a long-term take or pay minimum volume fixed price contract. Now, some buyers are interested and excited about this. Others are not. And so, we don't have to work with everybody, but there's sufficient demand for this contracting structure. And, we're making a very large capital investment, and so we need to be able to finance these projects, which Talus owns and operates the systems. We just sell the ammonia on a long-term fixed price offtake contract, and which is required by our investors to finance these projects. And so how we think about this business is you have to be able to price the ammonia at a discount to the long-term average price in that market. So this is possible in some places, but not all. And it works where you have local ammonia demand and affordable power. And so that, as I said, the intersection of ag in the corn, in the Midwest or the Corn Belt and renewable energy generation we kind of think that we kind of got lucky with that along with the tax credit. So um, this is how we think about it, and some of our look our customers agree, some don't want to buy it this way, but this is what we need to be able to do the projects. Uh, and some as we think about sort of building this business, some strategic considerations is again local ammonia demand in Iowa has a significant number of ethanol plants, and those ethanol plants indicate significant corn production, and
And
so
Tristan,
yeah,
just keeping an eye on the clock, sorry to interrupt. If you
yeah,
could wrap up in the next 30 to 60
yeah,
seconds, that'd be great.
certainly,
Thank
sure.
you.
Okay. So moving on, South Dakota is a very interesting one because there's abundant wind, but no nitrogen fertilizer production at all. And those farmers that pay the highest prices in the Corn Belt for nitrogen fertilizer. Kind of the last thing I want to touch on is in order to qualify for 45V, we need to evidence that we've used clean power through REC or EAC purchases. And then something and that has value in ethanol and other markets. We can actually sell these the green attributes of the ammonia, and that's something that we're working with Rob and Clean Counts on. And so with that, I will pass the baton here. And this is these green attributes. You can think of it as effectively a global food producer, food and beverage, will pay us, effectively for the environmental attribute, in which is another form of revenue that we use to further reduce the cost of the ammonia to the American farmer.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Tristan. And last but certainly not least, we have Rob to give us a look into policy and market infrastructure.
Well, that was a fantastic introduction. Mike, Luca, Tristan, thank you for teeing this up to make this conversation so pertinent, so timely, so important, so relevant, and really powerful presentation, Tristan. Love to see the success of the business. So I'm Rob Davis, Chief Growth Officer with Clean Counts. And one of the exciting things that we do is we happen to be North America's largest clean energy registry. So we've been a nonprofit that was been around since 2007, handling RECs or renewable energy certificates. Like I said, we're the largest in North America. Our software handled more than 400 million megawatt hours of RECs last year. And a registry is very simple to understand. It's you're already familiar with the term because everyone on the call has probably used either a wedding registry or a baby registry, right? So the point of registries is to prevent buying two gifts or double counting. So two entities taking credit for the same item. And in this case, we're talking about renewable energy and or environmental attributes. And so, as you can imagine, states and corporations all have clean energy goals, whether it's for science-based targets or because of state requirements or mandates. They have ambitious goals. Here is a picture from the back of a Cliff Bar that I took just a couple weeks ago. And you can see how they are describing use of renewable energy certificates to ensure that, yes, their auditors can go and prove that their systems are powered by 100% renewable energy. And so when Tristan talks about ensuring that their modular green ammonia systems are powered by 100% renewable energy, that's really what we're talking about, is we're taking the proven technology platform we've built and managed over the last nearly 20 years, and we're bringing that to apply to the clean ammonia space. And so CAMs will be something that companies can transact on to be able to have that ownership, that receipt, that documentation for their auditors and or other constituents to be able to prove that when they claim use of low carbon ammonia, that they can back it up with evidence. And so it's also exciting to be able to say, for folks like Dr. Reese, Mike Reese at the West Central Research Station, that when his wind turbine there in Morris, Minnesota stops spinning, he can still pair it up with another renewable resource elsewhere on the grid. And so in this way, we're able to simply look out and say, okay, just because that one wind turbine isn't spinning, we can still find hours and years where there is renewable generation available on the grid. It's really a treat to be able to work closely and collaboratively with Thales and others, other leaders in this space, to be able to do both demonstration and bring to scale systems that demonstrate the opportunity for ammonia and the difference that this can make in the lives and the livelihoods and economies of rural America. So we're really excited and ambitious for the opportunity in all of the Midwest and in places that are suffering from these fluctuating prices of renewables. Obviously, ammonia fertilizer has great opportunities with fertilizer use, but there, as Tristan mentioned, there are multiple other uses from steel to maritime to power generation to mining. And so very much appreciate Rachel, you and Nathan convening this conversation today. So timely and well orchestrated to be right after the news of the finalization of and having certainty with regards to 45V. So thanks for convening the conversation today.
Thank you, Rob. And that gives us a good lead into kind of the main question around 45V, or main discussion that I wanted to touch on just since it is so fresh. So what, and this can be for all the panelists and whoever wants to start first, otherwise I can call on you if nobody jumps in. But how are the new final rules for 45V, particularly the requirements around deliverability, time matching, all of that expected to impact project development timelines and investment decisions?
I mean, I'm happy to speak on this one. I will say that the initial draft, this House version and the initial Senate version were, certainly causing a lot of concern from our stakeholders, everybody from investors through to electric utilities and customers. It was it was talked about just about every meeting. So having this clarity and certainty for through January 1st, 2028 on what's available, is it going to be around, is really helpful. These projects are complicated. The contracts are complicated. They're infrastructure projects, and these things always take a little bit longer than you expect, and in some cases cost a little bit more than you initially budgeted. So, having a longer runway is really helpful for all producers and project developers. As far as the rules themselves, they did not change. And the rules work for us, given that our system was designed to operate on intermittent power. We'll actually start, hourly matching does not kick in until 2030, but that's something that we have already started working on, the matching of hydrogen generation with the generation of the renewable electricity in the RECs. And so I think that the main point here is this. Well, the credit was the sort of window to begin construction was shortened by 5 years. What we ended up with is significantly better than what we started with a couple of months ago. So, yeah, I think it gives folks, some time to actually implement this. And, the benefit of a 2028, stop is that if the composition of Congress changes in the midterms, well, then we start lobbying for the extension to, the original end date of the credit with Democrats. So, we do think there's opportunity to get the full 10 years and continue building this business. And we do work collaboratively with the other clean ammonia producers on the lobbying efforts.
And I'll only add from CleanCount's perspective, we've got the technology. We first did a demonstration of hourly matched renewable energy procurement back in 2021. So we've been ingesting hourly data from both MISO and SPP for more than 5 years now. So we're ready to go.
Great. And we will go on to a question for Dr. Zullo quick. What is one industrial process that you think is most ripe for disruption with green hydrogen or ammonia, and what is holding it back? Oh, I think you're muted.
You're not muted, but there's no sound. Try setting a different microphone.
Okay, does it work
Yeah,
now?
yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry for that. From a technology perspective, I think the conversion of hydrogen into ammonia with the atmospheric nitrogen. I think we have a plenty of good solution, and Talus has a really excellent one in my view. So the question really is the scaling up of hydrogen production and tying it up with clean energy sources. And I want to say that one area that I'm particularly interested is also not just using clean hydrogen from, say, electrolysis, which obviously is an option, but there are, for instance, chemical synthesis that are being explored now to make chemicals out of ethanol, and they produce hydrogen as a result. So that is still renewable hydrogen that could be used to make ammonia and integrates well with the ethanol plant. Because of time, we didn't really enter in a lot of the role of urea in this and why urea is important. But I want to also reiterate what Michael Rees mentioned. Urea is fundamentally stabilized ammonia, and you use CO2 for stabilization. Well, the largest single production of renewable CO2 is actually in the ethanol plants. So again, we create another great opportunity of integration. So I think from a point of view of technology, we have plenty of technology options. and they all work. So there's not really a lot of fundamental R&D needs to be done. What we need is innovation from a business perspective, thinking about some of also the marketing opportunity, changing the way we price it. I mean, could we have different contracts if instead of the feedstock tied to to natural gas is tied to renewable electricity, which is traded differently than natural gas, and obviously having the right framework of from a policy perspective. So as I said, I'm a technologist, but I don't see this so much of a technology problem at this point.
Perfect. Thank you. And then we've a question for Mike here, and I believe we do have another question from the audience. So Mike, with industrial agriculture um, being one of the largest consumers of ammonia globally, how can a decentralized renewable production help shift that system?
Well, I think it's we inherently renewable ammonia production is going to happen at a more regional scale or local level. We're not going to see 1,000 or a gigawatt or 2 gigawatts or 3 gigawatts wind farms necessarily. So we're going to see these distributed systems across Minnesota, the South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, and those are going to supply, a regional market. So I think that enables the addition of more wind capacity. So it helps provide uh, money into for farmers for wind leases. It provides money for the local communities to support your services, your hospitals, your you know other services across the communities. It increases the economic development and so I think there's a lot of benefit beyond just uh, looking at the cost of the ammonia. There's benefits that translate across the region. If you look at Minnesota, we send out about $1 billion a year in to pay for this ammonia coming into our state. And so if we're able to keep those dollars locally, it also helps the state from an economic standpoint, brings tax dollars into our state and all those other benefits.
Perfect. Thank you. And actually, if you look at the chat, we do have a question from Greg Jason. And Greg, let us know if there's somebody in particular you wanted to direct that to. But looks like think 10 years forward, what conversations and research we're focused on today do you think has moved forward to commercial scale? And which ones are still ongoing? For example, second generation ethanol.
I can start. I think some of the big discussions in the green ammonia industry have been around different processes. And it's everyone's looking to supplant the Haber-Bosch process. And the Haber-Bosch process has been around for, over 100 years. There's a lot of research that has gone into it to improve it. And it's just difficult to take that next step to go from Haber-Bosch to something else. So at some point in time, there will be a process that will be more efficient and more or closer matched with regional production. But I think I I tend to believe that we're going to see some modified Haber-Bosch still being around in 10 years. I think the real key is what Lucas said is in the hydrogen production. That's where a lot of the costs are from a capex and opex standpoint. So we're probably going to see more reduction in those costs either through technology improvement or just economies of numbers, being able to scale that production up.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that. Yeah, I agree completely. Haber-Bosch is really efficient. From our perspective, it's 6 to 7% of the energy consumption of the system. Hydrogen generation's at 90%. And so it's really in these sort of emerging, novel, newer forms of hydrogen generation, whether it be proton exchange membrane, solid oxide, AEM, whatever it is, with hundreds of billions of dollars going into hydrogen projects globally, we believe that, somebody's going to figure it out. And it doesn't need to be us, but given the sort of modular nature of the system, we can, fairly easily replace that hydrogen generation module to incorporate more efficient, cheaper forms of hydrogen generation. And so I'd say if I had to place a bet, it'd be on hydrogen cost of sort of hydrogen from electrolysis coming down as these technologies are proven, they become commercially available, they're reliable, and they're cost competitive.
And Rachel, I would only add that maybe there's some interesting social research that could go into to educating farmers and rural stakeholders about low carbon commodities and low carbon fertilizers, and use that as a source of differentiation and value added products. So I think that there's a number of different areas for promising, future research.
Yeah, and
Perfect.
that's a great point. Just want to add that while there's no green premium today, there is downstream in low carbon feedstocks for export ethanol markets like Canada, the UK, and some others in Asia. And again, we are working together with Rob and Clean Counts, to affect sales of green attributes. And so, well, you don't necessarily sell the ammonia for more, you could sell the green attribute. And I do think that, so currently the political climate is sort of moving away from um, CO2 reduction, but globally it's not. That continues in these companies. Most of them are, that are interested in this are multinational and they have net zero commitments. So I do think that that trend will continue, even if it is sort of subdued for the moment here in the United States.
Rachel, if I might add to that quickly,
Sure.
just if when I speak to classes and students about green ammonia and others as well, just general public, and talk about the Haber-Bosch process and we use natural gas to make ammonia, which is the building block for proteins, and you eat those proteins and they build your muscle. If you look at it that way, about half the protein in your body is derived from natural gas. And I think that turns a lot of people off. And I think as people begin to understand that, you're going to see a more of a increase demand for green-based sources of nitrogen. And so I think that's coming down the road. We've seen it in a lot of different sectors where the youth and young people are driving these industries and these markets.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. There's a lot more we could cover. But since this is kind of an introduction, we talked about kind of doing another one at some point to kind of build off of this foundation. So we just really appreciate all of your time and thank you for the audience members for bearing with a little bit over time. And just a couple quick closing items. Like I mentioned, we'll be hosting additional webinars, hopefully more on this and other topics in the coming months. So keep an eye on your inbox and social media for updates. And then we also wanted to just plug the National Conservative Energy Summit coming up August 25th to the 27th in sunny Cleveland, Ohio. So if you wanted to come and learn more about kind of market-based clean energy solutions, we'll be sure and send information about that along with some follow-up resources and the webinar recording in the next few days. So thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists and audience members for attending. Have a great rest of your day.